Sleeping bags, pretty much my favorite thing to talk about when it comes to gear. Because sleep in the wilderness is of utmost importance, and it's the biggest reason why most people fear going out and camping and backpacking, because getting a good night's sleep can be a challenge. So let's talk about all things sleeping bags. But first, before we get into the video, please like and subscribe to our channel. We're doing a whole series on tip videos to get you outside having more fun and being efficient with your camp experience. Without further ado, let's get into sleeping bags. If you're looking at making your first sleeping bag purchase, or maybe even your second or third sleeping bag purchase, there's a lot to know. And in the last few years, 5 to 10 years, a lot has changed in the sleeping bag world. And it kind of used to be the debate between just down versus synthetic, and that was really the only question that you had to do, the only question that you had to tackle in order to determine what to buy. But there's a few more elements involved, and so I just kind of wanted to talk about sleeping bags in general and to look at what makes the most sense for you. So let's talk about the first two kind of really simple breakdowns of categories. We've got down sleeping bags and we've got synthetic sleeping bags. So there are benefits to both bags, and depending on what you're doing, one might make more sense than the other. With synthetic sleeping bags, these bags are definitely going to be on the cheaper end. So if economics is a major factor for you in your gear buying decision, then I might suggest looking at a synthetic sleeping bag. They're definitely quite a bit cheaper than your down alternative versions of the same sleeping bag. The downside, however, is that synthetic sleeping bags do not crush down, they do not pack down nearly as small as down. And so if you have a backpack and you have a warm synthetic sleeping bag, there's a good chance that your sleeping bag is going to take up half your backpack. And obviously that is suboptimal for a lot of people. So let's talk about, I'm kind of getting out of order here, but let's back it up just a quick second. The synthetic sleeping bags, the other benefits other than cost is that traditionally, if you get a synthetic sleeping bag wet, then it still will do what it's supposed to do. It'll keep you warm at night. It might not be, a wet sleeping bag is not exactly fun to sleep in, but a synthetic sleeping bag will keep you warm. So if you accidentally dunk in a creek at a creek crossing or something like that, and all of your gear gets wet, or you're caught in a downpour, or you're just gonna be in a really wet, nasty kind of environment for your sleeping, then a synthetic bag is a really good option. With down, as it gets wet, it tends to get clumpy, and therefore it loses its insulation value. So it's not, a down bag won't keep you warm if it's wet. So that's kind of always been the main, like, hey, synthetic bags, it will keep you warm if it gets wet. And that's still true today. However, there are some down alternatives that will make that not necessarily as big of a case. We'll talk about that in a minute though. So if you're getting a synthetic bag, you're likely getting a bag from, there's lots of good options. You can get it from Walmart, you can get it from your local Sportsman's Warehouse, just kind of your camping, hunting, sleeping bag. A lot of it, if you're just basing out of a camp more so than your backpack, then a synthetic bag is a really great option for you. However, if saving space and weight is a significant factor, then down is definitely the way to go. So down just compresses so much more tight and neat, and you can save a lot of critical and important space in your backpack. I have backpacked with synthetic bags before, and they take up literally half my backpack, and that's not very fun. And not only that, it weighs about 2 pounds more for the same sleeping bag, the same warmth value of a sleeping bag. And that as well definitely adds up. So the long time drawback for down sleeping bags has been what happens if they get wet. And that's still true. A regular down sleeping bag, if it gets wet, it'll get clumpy and it won't keep you warm. So making sure that you keep your bag really dry is very important. However, there has been a new development in the technology of sleeping bags, and that is with hydrophobic down. Hydrophobic down is awesome, and it went through a couple of iterations, and early on in the sleeping bag rush for hydrophobic down, companies started putting some kind of actually pretty harmful and nasty chemicals on the down that would make, what it literally is, hydrophobic down is down that is treated with a chemical so that the water repels off of each individual down feather and makes it so that it's impervious to water. And then therefore, if you are in a wet condition, the down will still do what it's supposed to do. It'll be lofty and it'll keep you warm. However, nobody wants to be sleeping in chemicals that are actually quite bad for you and the environment. So the companies have gone through some changes, and now there's a lot more natural products out there, such as Nikwax, which does the same thing, and companies that I know of, such as Thermarest, and I know that there are others as well, that have made some really great bags that are based off of a hydrophobic down that uses natural materials like a Nikwax. There are other options as well, but basically the thing that you want to look at is the chemical treatment, whatever it might be, is it ethical, not only for the environment, but also for you, because you don't want to be sleeping in something that might have some long-term health effects for you. So there's water treatment down, and that has gone a long way. Now the price is still relatively similar. It is a little bit more expensive, of course, but it's not that different than most down bags. So that as well is another factor. So if I'm buying a sleeping bag, my preference is certainly for down, and I have loved the hydrophobic down. I've gone through most of the iterations as they've come along, and I find that they are great. They perform really well. And I've been in some nasty conditions. I've had times when my tent has totally failed me, or I failed my tent and I got water all in my tent, and yet I was still able to sleep warm in that sleeping bag, even in cold conditions. So those are some things to think about. Now there's also a few more layers into the sleeping bag equation, such as what is the down fill. And if you're looking at that, you might see 650 down, you might see 750 down, you might see 800 down. And basically that is just how much down are they actually cramming into like the baffles and the zones within the sleeping bag. And so if you're looking at it, typically 650 fill down is on the cheaper end, and something like an 800, maybe an 850 fill down is on the more expensive end. And really, it's just about how much down are they putting in. And so if you can afford it, I definitely suggest going for the higher fills, the 800 type fills. But I've definitely slept in a lot of sleeping bags in that 650 range that are totally fine. So it's really all about you knowing what you're buying and then finding out what's right for you. Okay, so let's get a little bit more in depth and actually pull a sleeping bag out and take a look at it. This is my winter sleeping bag. This is the Coal Membrane from Marmot. It is a negative 20 degree bag. And that, I just wanted to talk about temperature ratings for a little bit. So there's a common misconception about temperature ratings that your tried and true 15 degree sleeping bag that you're going to be getting, which is probably the most common sleeping bag to get, that it actually is going to keep you nice and warm and toasty down to 15 degrees. And well, that's sort of not the case. And there's also sometimes companies might say one thing and actually build a bag that means another thing. So when you're getting say a 15 degree sleeping bag, what that actually means is that you're getting a bag that will keep you alive at 15 degrees, not necessarily that you're going to sleep great and feel cozy at 15 degrees. So some companies have started doing temperature range zones, and that can be a lot more helpful in informing you as the buyer to know exactly what you're getting. So you have within a new system of rating, you have your comfort, you have your lower limit, and then you have your extreme zone. So the extreme is you're not gonna die, you might make it through. So let's say you have a 15 degree sleeping bag and it ends up being a winter blizzard that drops down to negative 10 or negative 15 degrees. That bag is obviously not gonna be as sufficient to keep you comfortable, but it might keep you alive. Now, the lower limit is typically around what those sleeping bag companies have been using as their rating system. So the 15 degree bag, it might keep you to sleep in fits, like on and off, but mostly you're going to be uncomfortable at 15 degrees, while the comfort limit is actually much closer to around 30 degrees. So your 15 degree bag might be great if it stays above freezing, but if it goes below freezing, if the temperature drops below freezing, you might be having a not very fun night. So just so you know, there is some wiggle room within these temperature ranges, and it's important to know exactly what you're getting into when you're buying a sleeping bag. Most sleeping bags at the 15 degree range are great for almost all kind of general camping, It's kind of your 3-season camping. So if you're going out and camping from March through October, that's probably, obviously geographically dependent, but that's probably going to be fine for you. Now, if you wanted to do 4-season camping, that's where you're going to need something a little bit more robust, like a winter bag that is going to be good down into the -10 range, -20 range, and there's even some really beefy bags out there that are -40 in the range. But pretty much you need to be Eric Larson and crossing the Arctic poles in order for that to be really necessary. Or maybe you're doing a Everest expedition. Otherwise, if you're just doing some general winter camping, -20 is pretty money, and that's what I have used in all of my winter campings and been down in -20 degree conditions and still been sleeping pretty comfortably in this bag specifically. Okay, now there's one more element, is men's versus women's sleeping bags and what size you need to get. So most sleeping bags, there are labels that this is a men's sleeping bag and this is a women's sleeping bag. However, a tube is basically still a tube. And most sleeping bags are really more unisex, and it has more to do with coloring than anything else. However, there are some subtle differences that are important to know. Most men's sleeping bags, the cut is actually made for a broader shouldered person to be sleeping comfortably. And most women's bags have a slightly more room around the hips for a person sleeping to have a little bit more room to move around a little bit more comfortably if that's your shape. So you can totally be a dude and buy a women's sleeping bag. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing inherently different about the sleeping bag that's really going to make that big of a difference. It's really just about where the shape of the sleeping bag tends to give the sleeper a little bit more room. And otherwise, that's kind of about it for what the difference is for men's versus women's sleeping bags. There are some different cuts and styles. Mummy bags are kind of the most commonly thought of sleeping bags shape when it comes to what to get, and they are the kind of tried and true classic. However, there are some other styles. There's more square cut, and then there's kind of some spoon shapes. I know Nemo does some interesting spoon shaped designs, and those are great. And it's just really just more of a detail that there are some different options out there. So if you really like having more room for your feet to kick around, and that's really important to you, maybe don't get a mummy bag, because the mummy bag has a pretty narrow foot box. However, the mummy bag is classic for a reason, that it is very efficient in keeping people warm, and you don't really waste a lot of extra space inside, and therefore having to have your body spend more energy keeping that space warm. Just want to point out a couple more things about sleeping bags while I've got your attention. So this is the Ascent 2 from Sea to Summit. This is a 3-season bag that I have really enjoyed, and I just wanted to talk about a couple of the features that might also help inform you in your decisions about sleeping bags. So one of the things that I think is important is how to sleep. Well, one of the things that I think is important is to know your sleeping type and to know if you tend to roll around a lot and how you can sleep comfortably. This has 2 zippers, and I really like this feature of this bag, the ability to kind of turn this almost into more of like a blanket. So you can open this up pretty warm. You can close it down to be in a mummy style. And that to me is really important because I was recently camping and it was pretty warm, and yet the temperature was dropping throughout the night, but when I first got into the sleeping bag, it was pretty warm. So I could just have this loose and kind of draped over me comfortably. And then as the night got colder, then I could just zip both of these sleeping bags up, or both of these zippers up, and make it a lot more comfortable. There are a couple other features to the sleeping bags in general I want to point out. One is most sleeping bags will have some sort of cinch feature to go around your neck and head area. And this is pretty standard, and most people don't really even use them, but if the temperature is starting to drop, it can be really handy to just cinch this up and really tighten it around your face. And then just making sure that your mouth is always exposed, because it's really important that you're actually breathing all of your air out into the tent or out into the night air and not into your sleeping bag. That moisture that you're breathing out is actually detrimental to your sleep. It's just putting water into your sleeping bag and making it less efficient. It also just kind of tends to make it clammy and not very comfortable. So make sure that you are doing that. A lot of sleeping bags also have a little extra bit of fabric here, and that's called a draft collar. So the draft collar is more common on a winter bag or a cold weather bag than it is your typical summer bag. And what it's literally doing is creating a collar to go around your neck, so that as you are sleeping, then this creates a nice tight seal around your neck so that every time you move, you're not whoofing a bunch of warm air outside of the sleeping bag and losing that efficiency, and then you have a warm sleeping bag. So if you're feeling cold, or if you know that you're a cold sleeper, maybe look for a sleeping bag that has a draft collar that you can use to cinch up around your neck and help you sleep great throughout the night. One last quick thing on sizing. With the men's and women's sleeping bags, also there's larges and longs and regulars and shortcuts. So if you are over 6'2" or so, roughly, then you're going to want a long size sleeping bag. And if you're in that 5'8", maybe to 6'2" range, you're going to want a regular size sleeping bag. Now the important thing to note is obviously if you're really tall, you just want to fit in your sleeping bag. But if you're on the shorter end, then you don't want a whole lot of extra space at the tail end of your sleeping bag. Let's say you're only 5'5", then you have this much extra just free floating that your body is not filling. And you want to avoid that. So if that happens to be the case, you can do things like put a jacket or some different clothing down at the bottom of your sleeping bag to fill up that space. But obviously it's more important to just get a sleeping bag that fits you better. So if you're on the shorter end, get a short, look for a short sleeping bag. And if you're right around 6 foot or so, then the regular is about right. And if you're taller, get a longer sleeping bag, of course. Okay, that's a lot of the things. If you've made it this far in this video, I salute you. You are now almost an expert at all things sleeping bags. However, there is one last quick topic I want to talk about, and that is just proper storage and care for your sleeping bag. If you've just come out of the wilderness, it can be tempting to just throw your stuffed sleeping bag into the closet or up in the attic or wherever it is that you might store your gear, because obviously that's its most compressed shape and it's maybe the easiest to store. However, that's actually not very good for the lifetime. However, that's not actually very good for the lifespan of your down sleeping bag or your synthetic sleeping bag. And it is much better to let your sleeping bag breathe and be in a more comfortable, relaxed position. So I have just built a rack for all of my sleeping bags, because these are literally all of my sleeping bags. Now I have a plethora of sleeping bags, and that's probably different than most people. But I do recommend that you, at the bare minimum, actually use the generously built stuff sack that comes with each sleeping bag when you buy it. Now, it might look like quite a bit larger, and that's actually what you're supposed to store it in. It just allows for that down to kind of move around and not be at a constantly stressed, compressed state. And it is much better for the lifetime and lifespan of your sleeping bag. So when you get back, make sure that you are airing out your sleeping bag just to give it some breath. Not only did you stink it up and probably fart in it once or twice at night, you need to let that escape. But any other moisture that may have accumulated from your breath, from the interior of the tent, from any rain that may have come on your sleeping bag, that needs to dry off so that your bag is dry and nice and not getting dewy or anything like that. So hang it up. Use those extra big, wide sleeping bag stuff sacks that your bag comes with, and use proper storage techniques for your sleeping bag. Okay. I think that's it. That is everything sleeping bags. That's a lot of stuff to tackle, but hopefully if you are buying your sleeping bag, you now are more informed and more well equipped. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you liked this video, and I hope that you find our tip series really helpful for making sure that you are well informed and know how to get out and have more fun in your adventures outside. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Eric Hansen. We'll see you later.